I'm, as Troy said, Andrew Delaney. I'm a principal technical support engineer here in Lund, and my main focus is Qlik Sense. I've been with Qlik a little over 2 years at this date. So the aim today is to go into a little bit about shared persistence because the June release marks the final transition to shared persistence, and because of this transition and changes that have been made within the product, this also means that upgrading from Sense 3.0 and also the first two releases of Qlik Sense 3.1 is a more lengthy and complicated procedure. So I'm going to then follow that with a live demonstration. So shared persistence was introduced in Qlik Sense 3.1. It was actually the second service release of 3.1 that added it to the installer. It uses a central database and a file share, and it eliminates and sidesteps a lot of the reliability and performance problems that were faced under synchronized persistence. In essence, we're moving from a model that looks like this to one that looks like this. And in fact, this is what we're doing today. In your own implementation, you can move the database and the file share off of the central node to an entirely separate server if you'd like. But today we're doing the simpler of the options, which is to leave it on the central node. So the thing that complicates this upgrade process is that there were database changes made in 3.1 Service Release 2 and above that the June 2017 installer requires to be in place to perform an upgrade. And so if you try and run the installer now, it will actually reject you and say you need to either do a separate upgrade to 3.1 SR2 or later, and then do an upgrade, or you'll need to go through the steps that we're going to go through today. So first we need to prepare, right? Make sure you back up your system. I can't emphasize this enough. Whenever you do anything major with your Qlik Sense system, or really any computer system, you should make sure you have a good backup. And the other thing is shared persistence means that you have a different service that every other node is connecting to, which means you need to make sure that the ports are open for your database and your file share. So we use a standard Windows file share, which also means that that file share needs to be mounted in a standard Windows way. So any form of storage you're using has to be accessible as a standard Windows file share. So let's begin the demo. So I've got a central node here, and it's part of a multi-node structure. I need to refresh this page, sorry. It's running Qlik Sense 3.02, and it's a 3-node multi-node system. You can actually see up here that we've got 3 nodes. They're all connected. Everything is working correctly. It's a very lightly used system, so we know that there's no problems with it. This is kind of what you want. Ideally, you want your system to be healthy before you upgrade it. So we've made a backup of the central node, and you can see here we're just following the procedures we have on the help site for doing a site backup. So we've got our certificates, we've got our database backup, and we've also got the important files from the system. So we are confident that if anything goes wrong today, we can restore this backup and reinstall 3.02, and everything will be as it was. So now we'll start, and the first thing we do is we shut down everything but the database on the central node. We don't want the system running while we're making these backups, while we're performing the changes that we need, and the same thing applies to our RIM nodes. So on our RIM nodes, I'm doing the same thing, except on the RIM nodes, we actually don't want anything running. We're actually going to uninstall the RIM nodes completely during this process. So that's the first step. Just shut everything down. All right, now we've done that. The next step is to actually change the password in the database. Now, this may seem a bit odd. Under synchronized persistence, the only database you've ever needed to know is the superuser password, and we actually never write the superuser password to any file in the system. But in order to do that, what we do is we actually create a separate account on the database, which is Qlik Sense repository user. So the thing about this user, though, is under synchronized persistence, every install uses a randomly generated 10-character password. And in later versions of Qlik Sense, we have a utility that allows you to read that encrypted password. But in Qlik Sense 3.0, that utility does not exist. So instead, we're going to take the alternative approach, which is to connect to the local database, and we're using the superuser password to do that. We're connecting with the Postgres account, and then we're going to change the password of the Qlik Sense repository. And the reason why we have to do this after we've taken our backup is as soon as we change this password, our Qlik Sense system will not work. It won't log in anymore because it's got the wrong password stored. So this is kind of the point at which you have started the upgrade process. So the next step we do is we need to take a slightly different from normal backup of the Qlik Sense database. So we need to go to this folder and we need to run the dump all command. And so we've actually got the steps here. So first we're setting our user and our password. Okay, that's fair enough. I didn't actually finish the last command, so it has brought me up short. Jumping steps, that's what you get for doing that. And then so we're setting the password and the username for our next command, and then we're running this dump all command, and we're piping our output. And we're piping our output to a particular file, which we're putting on C drive. So this will take not very long to run, especially on this system. It's not a very big system. It may take a little longer to run on yours. The next step is to actually double check that we did it correctly. So this is a 7 megabyte file. In our system, if it's only a few kilobytes, then you should be worried and you should double check what you've written, because you could have some kind of error message here rather than a dump of the database. So we've now backed up the database. So we now need to prepare the file share. So we're putting the file share on the central server. That means that's because all of our resources are there. I've actually already created the shell of this. So you can see I've got the Sense share folder. And so almost everything's going to come from the program data Qlik folder. So we'll start with apps. And this one is fairly clear, but again, all of this is actually going to be in the help documentation. In fact, it already is in the migrating from synchronized to shared persistence article that is up there. And so the next step is archive logs. This is actually an optional step, but we can go and get that. So that's from this folder. And we just either copy or move the contents. Since we've backed up the system, we'll move the contents in our case. And now we've got custom data. Custom data is the only one where we actually leave the Qlik Sense folder because we need to get the contents of the custom data folders. These are where we keep connector information. You find both a Qlik folder and a Qlik tech folder, especially for your older connectors. You'll find things there, but sometimes they're duplicated, so the REST connector shows up in both. And finally, we have the static content folder. So the static content folder is a little bit special. It's actually meant to have a set of subdirectories in it. We're getting a bunch of things from our repository. This is where we get our app content, our default apps, and our extensions, all of these bits. So these folders here, app content, default apps, default content, and extensions. So these are all resources that all of our Qlik Sense servers will need access to. So that's why they go on the file share. And there we go. We've now moved all of those over and we've prepared our file share. Well, we've almost prepared our file share. The next step is to actually share it. Obviously, a file share that is not visible to our service account on all servers is not very useful. So we've got our service account details in here. This is all to ensure that I do not typo. If you make a typo in some of these steps, you can have it'll take longer than we have time for to resolve the fallout. So as always, be careful when making changes to your system. All right, so now we've done all of that. The next step is to uninstall Qlik Sense. On our central server, we want to uninstall Qlik Sense we want to just follow the defaults, right? So on our central server, we're trying to keep our certificates intact because that way we don't need to worry about needing to reset all of our data connections. We don't need to worry about resetting our user directory connector or anything which involves a password, which are encrypted. The passwords are encrypted with our root certificate. So we're leaving the root and server certificates and data folders intact, but we're uninstalling Qlik Sense. And now at this point, we can do the exact same thing on our RIM nodes, except on our RIM nodes, we're going to be a little bit more thorough. So on our RIM nodes, we're going to completely uninstall Qlik Sense. We're going to remove all of the certificates, all of the folders. And the reason for that is twofold. One, we don't need a lot of the files that are already there. We don't need the apps. We don't need the app content. All of that's on our file share. So why do we keep it around taking up space? But the other reason for doing this is because the Qlik Sense June 2017 release contains a new feature which allows the failover of the central node. And in order to have that work, we need more information than the previous certificates provided. So that is what we do. We actually completely get rid of it and we set it up again. All of the configuration information for your nodes is kept in the central database. So we won't actually need to reconfigure our RIM nodes. We'll only need to reinstall and redistribute the certificates. So again, I'm just going to uninstall it on this other RIM node, and I'll do that off screen while we get moving on the central node. So we've uninstalled Qlik Sense on the central node. Now we need to install a new version. So I've got the installer sitting here. This is a technical preview that we're installing today, which means it has a relatively unusual file name. But on the final release, it will of course just be Qlik Sense setup. What we need to do is we need to actually point the installer at the dump that we made earlier. And we need to give it an absolute path. If you give it a relative path, the present working directory is not actually preserved by the installer, so it will lose track of it, and then your install will fail. So we don't want that. So then that will start up our installer. And this shouldn't take very long. There we go. This is still complaining about the fact that we've got the services panel open, and really we don't need it, so I'll get rid of that and we'll install it. So this will, for the most part, not show anything particularly different from a standard installation for a little while. So we're installing a local database here because we're going to keep the database on the central node, and we need to give it the password for our database user. And so normally we would need to have checked the string and retrieved the password that way, but instead we uninstalled. So instead we changed the password because we don't have the utility to read that. So it needs to be the same one as in the database dump. If you get that wrong, the install will fail. And it will fail a few minutes from now. So it actually, we don't check it here, we check it later on in the install process. All right, so now we are also going to get the file share here. Again, I'm copying here because I do not want to typo it because I do not have the time available in the presentation to deal with the fallout from that. It is recoverable, but it's much easier if you get it right the first time. As the saying goes, measure twice, cut once. And so we're installing Sense into the default location. And here you can see it's detected a database, and that's the database we provided before. So we are going to give it the super user password, and here we go. So now we need to give it the service account and we'll go from there. So while this is installing, we can start the installation process on our RIM nodes, but we actually can't finish the installation on the RIM nodes until the install on the central node is finished. And this is because the central node is has our database, and the installer actually checks the database credentials you provided. So when this finishes going up, it won't be very long. It will. We are once again going to tell it, yes, we want this to. We're telling this we want it to join a cluster, so it wants to know where the database is. So the database is on our central server, or Qlik server 1 in this case, and it needs the password and the username. So here it checks it, and our installer is still running on our central node. So we actually can't finish installing the RIM nodes just yet. So we have actually run into a failure on the central node, which means that I must have provided it the wrong password at one point during this install process. So we need to start the installer again. So here we go. We accept the license agreement. We're creating a cluster here, installing the local database and giving it that's the one I had open. Thank you very much. There we go. I'm giving it the password for the user. Again, we're listening on all interfaces to all IP addresses because that's the simplest approach. We're using the same file share. And we're installing it to the default location. And as I said, you need to make sure that you get all of these details correct, because if any of them are wrong, the installation will fail and it will take time to recover. And unfortunately, it'll take time to recover while you're trying to do other things. So let's just watch this for the moment and make sure that we haven't accidentally copied the wrong thing when we were renaming things, which is a danger when you are doing this. So you can actually see it we've changed the version of Postgres that's being installed here. So it creates a new database in a new folder in the central server. I was planning to go into a little bit more about the sense share, but at this point, it's more important to make sure that this is installing correctly. Given that it's moved on to the repository, though, I think we are probably right. But let's just make sure it moves on to the next one before we prematurely. Yes, okay, great. That is good news. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go back to our slides for a moment, and I'm going to go over the file share. So this is all available in our help, but this is the set of folders that we are copying. So again, we're collecting our apps because oddly enough, all of our nodes are going to need applications. The archive logs is optional. It's there because all of the servers need to have a central point to collect their log files. And the only reason why you're copying the old stuff over is to maintain history. If the history is not that important to you, then you don't need to do it. The connectors and the custom data folder is so that all of your servers have the same information about the connectors, and then the static content is fairly useful for all of the servers because it's got all your images, your extensions. The monitoring apps are in the default apps folder, so the servers need access to that. So that's what we're setting up when we do that file share. And I just, okay, and so now we're still installing the service dispatcher here. So let's just get back to it. Okay, so I'm going to also set up the installer on the other RIM node while we're waiting. Again, this doesn't take too long. This is Unfortunately, the downside of doing an installer, our install is not incredibly speedy, so we just need to wait for both of the installs to complete. And that's also why I'm trying to get this set up now, just because that way it's less work when it comes to the final um, the final stage of the presentation. So that is too many characters. It is clearly copying the wrong field. Let's actually give it the right field. So until that install finishes, we can't do very much on the central node, but it's right near the end now. It's just installing the printing service, and once it's done with that, I think it should be pretty much finished. And then we can watch it start up. So when I'm looking at a Sense server and I'm waiting impatiently for it to finish starting, um, because I'm not the most patient person in the world, what I do is I tend to look at this folder. So this, there we go, that install is finished. So this folder has our repository service. It's where the repository service logs. And what happens is when the server starts up, it actually marks the old server's old log files with the previous date and creates new ones. And when it finishes starting up, it will clean away these files. And so as soon as all of those files have been cleaned up, I know that the central server will be up, and it's the slowest service to start. It's faster than under synchronized persistence because it's no longer loading a copy of the database into memory to cache it, but it's still the slowest service generally to start. So as soon as these clear away, I know that everything's working and that we can start, we can check the system. So the user management's probably the last one. Shouldn't take very much longer. And then yep, there we go. So now if we refresh the QMC here, we're already logged in because the browser has stored our credentials. We can see the system's up and running. We can see that there's new settings because we're under shared persistence. So you've got the service cluster settings here. And we can also see that our applications are migrating. This will only take a minute or so, but we'll just monitor to see that that's working. We'll also see, obviously, that our RIM nodes are not actually available to us right now. They're offline. We took them offline. They're not even installed right now. So there's not a whole lot to worry about there. We did have migration fail on the operations monitor. That is unusual. But that is also not part of the presentation, so we will go into that some other time. So now this system is up. We can go to the hub and we can check that applications open and that we can create new applications, which are kind of the most basic steps that we can do. This is an empty application, but this is just like the bare minimum of my server is working and it is doing the things I expect it to be able to do. Good, that's working. Fantastic. So now we will start the installs on the RIM nodes. So all we need to do is click Next on our RIM node and just go through and get that started. So again, we need to give it the account responsible for the services, which is here, with a very sophisticated password, almost unguessable really, and we just run the installer. And we do the same thing on the other RIM node. And this will take a little while to do because it's an install process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to our slides from before. Let's do a recap of what we did. So the first step for this upgrade, we shut down all of the Qlik Sense services on all of the nodes. Then we changed the Qlik Sense repository password. If you have the connection string editor utility, you can use that instead to retrieve the password, but we need to do that before we uninstall Qlik Sense. We need to do that before we create a dump of the database, because once you uninstall Qlik Sense, you no longer have the tools on your system to do that. And instead, you need to install those tools. And that takes time and effort, and it's much better to get it done beforehand. So then once we've created the dump of the database, we also create the file share. And so that means that we're all set up. We're ready for shared persistence. So then we uninstall Qlik Sense. We uninstall Qlik Sense on all of the nodes, but we keep the certificates on the central node. When we install Qlik Sense, we need to make sure we use the command line and we use the data dump file flag, pointing at the dump we created back in step 3, and then we install Qlik Sense on the RIM nodes as well. And then lastly, we'll redistribute the certificates. So let's check how that install process is going on our RIM node. So it's at the service dispatcher. We don't have long to wait. Once that is done, we'll redistribute the certificates to this node, which is server 3. We should be doing this on both, but it's the exact same process, so I don't think it's worth the time to show you the same thing twice. And once that's done, this upgrade will be complete. We'll be able to test that the server works. Under shared persistence, because everything's connecting to a central node and a central file share, we don't need to worry about how long it will take for the RIM node to synchronize and to have all of the files replicate over to it and the database to replicate over to it, because that process doesn't exist. It's connecting to the central server. We already know it can connect to the database, otherwise we couldn't install it. The only thing that's left is it connecting to the share. And it gets that information from the database. So as long as we've done our job correctly with respect to the read-write privileges of the service account and the ports being open, connecting it should be fairly painless, and it's then just a matter of distributing the certificates appropriately. So our printing service is ready. I'm just going to start up Internet Explorer for the next step, which is the distribution of the certificates. So this is installed, this is now running, and so we can go to our central node and we can run we can check on the nodes. So what we can see is this is still showing as offline because the server had to actually start up, and we can see that the server now is saying, hey, I don't have a certificate to talk to you, or rather the central node trying to ping it has gone, hey, this server doesn't have a certificate. And so we just go through this. So this is, we need to go to this URL on the RIM node, and we need to make sure that we copy and paste the password. That password is randomly generated. So there is no way to automate this, unfortunately, but it's pretty straightforward to do. And this sends a zip with the certificates to the RIM node so that the service can be successfully unlocked and communicate with the rest of our system. And this will only take a little while, but this will change back to offline briefly, and then the service will show up. So you can see it's showing as initializing here, and then it should come up in a moment. There we go, one service running, and then the rest should also come up. In fact, I'm pretty sure if we head here and refresh, this is server 3, so this is the one we've been working with, we should already be able to get into the hub. There we go, and we can see our applications are already reflected, and we can open those applications. And with that, the upgrade is complete. Sorry for the digression. It caught me a little off guard to have that initial install fail. So let's go to, oh, sorry, yes, takeaways. Make sure you back up your Qlik Sense environment before you upgrade. Make sure you plan for the change. Make that file share, check your firewall settings, and remember you can't perform a standard upgrade if you're running Qlik Sense version 3.1, SR1, or earlier. Okay, so questions. Would you mandate to restart the server after uninstallation? I wouldn't normally do that, no. As you can see, we don't need to do that. So any new installation will be implicitly in shared persistence mode. You don't need to do anything, right? Yes, that's correct. If you're installing a new Qlik Sense system fresh, you don't need to do anything special to go into shared persistence mode. You do need to have a file share created, however. It can't create the Windows share and share it with all of the appropriate accounts. Can you watch this webinar later? Absolutely you can. It will be up. You can go to our Qlik Sense community. Let's see. why do we need to change the database password if I know it and I get the database dump every day? If you already know the password for specifically the Qlik Sense user, then you do not need to change the password. However, there are two accounts, right? There is the super user account, which has the username Postgres, and then the super user password that's set on the installation. And there is the Qlik Sense repository user. And if you know, you should know the super user password. But if you're running synchronized persistence, you probably don't know the Qlik Sense repository user password. And if you don't know that password, the installation will fail at the step. It will fail during the long install step, and then when you dig through the files, you will see that it's because the passwords don't match for the Qlik Sense repository user. And it's a 10-character randomly generated password. So the chances of you randomly guessing it, pretty slim. So can I confirm that you don't need to delete the Qlik folder and program data? The new database won't actually be created in the same place because it's got a different version, it's a different location, but I'm pretty sure the old database is removed in the process. But you don't need to delete the folder. You just, if you don't, it didn't move the stuff when you created the file share, you may end up with more space being consumed than you need. That's about it. What services are running on the RIM nodes? So in the RIM nodes in this demo, all of the services are running. All 5 of the major services and of course the dispatcher are running on the RIM nodes. The only thing that isn't running compared to synchronized persistence is the RIM nodes do not have the Qlik Sense repository database running. So how do you get the operations monitor to work after the upgrade? So the operations monitor we've got articles in our help database on getting the operations monitor to run and there's also stuff in our help site for multi-node sites. It really depends on the specific problem you're encountering. I don't have the time to look into why that didn't migrate. I've run this, rehearsed this demo a number of times, and this is the first time that app has not migrated. I really don't know why that's happened. So Snapshot Manager for shared persistence. Actually, the Snapshot Manager does not support shared persistence at this time. It is not included in the June 2017 release. Instead, I would highly recommend that you look into the manual backup process. You can automate it because it's all command line stuff, and you look at that. You can't use the Snapshot Manager at this time. Were there any changes to the folder structure required for shared persistence after 3.2.4? We've already migrated to that some time ago. Fortunately, no. There are no folder changes required for that. If you're already on shared persistence, you're already on a version greater than 3.1.2, it should be as simple as run the installer and run the upgrade process on all of your nodes. Still backup. Make sure if it's a major change to your system, make sure you back up first, but it should be a much simpler process. I am deliberately showing you the worst case scenario that that we can reasonably test for. So it is, you're on an old version of the previous major release and you're on synchronized persistence because you have to be, and then you have this process for the upgrade.
Okay. Thank you very much. We hope you enjoyed this session, and big thanks to Andrew for presenting. We appreciate getting experts like Andrew to share with us. And everyone, please have a great rest of your day.